Michel Danino, Professor Archaeology, Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, Gujarat. Now our Director, Dr. Nandita Krishna, will honor Professor Michel Danino.
Yeah, from this. It should work. It's not a...
A small introduction to Professor Michel Danino. French-born Professor Michel Danino has lived in India since 1977. A student of Indian civilization, he has written on proto-historical India, The Lost River, on the Trial of the Saraswati, 2010, and Indian Culture and India's Future, 2011, Sri Aurobindo and India's Rebirth, an edited volume, 2018. Since 2011, he has been teaching courses on Indian civilization and knowledge systems at IIT Gandhinagar, where he has been assisting with their Archaeological Sciences Center. He is also the convener of a CBSE committee for the course, Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India, whose 2-volume textbook he co-edited with Professor Kapil Kapoor. He is a former member of ICHR, a member of the Central Advisory Board on Culture and the National Steering Committee for the implementation of the National Educational Policy 2020. In 2017, he was awarded the Padma Shri for his work on education and culture. Now I invite Professor Michel Danino to give his speech on Harappan art, a study in iconographic continuity.
Morning, and many thanks to CPRIIR Foundation and Dr. Nandita Krishna in particular for inviting me in this conference. I have been interested for some time in questions of continuity, because we have this civilization about which you have all heard quite a lot already between yesterday and today morning, and it seems to disintegrate at the start of the 2nd millennium BC, and then 1,000 years later, approximately, a second civilization, sometimes called second urbanization of India, sometimes called Ganges civilization, there is no fixed terminology, re-emerges, which will be in continuity with the classical civilization of India. So the question is, which has actually exercised the archaeologists right from the very beginning of when the Harappan civilization was identified in 1924, as Professor Prabhakar reminded us. So next year will be the 100th anniversary of the identification of this Harappan civilization. Right from the beginning, people wondered, archaeologists, scholars, Sanskritists, and so on, Indologists wondered, what is the relationship between these two civilizations? And in fact, quite a lot of archaeologists, if you read, for example, Ernst Mackey's excavation reports at Mohenjo-daro, 2 volumes, he constantly brings out a lot of material continuities, which he sees between the Harappan civilization and and sometimes even the villages that were nearby Mohenjo-daro while he was excavating in the 1930s, right? A lot of material traditions, objects of daily use, ornaments and so on, which were preserved. So nevertheless, there have been skeptics, there have been people saying that despite that because of the loss of urbanism, the loss of the Harappan script, the fact that the long-distance trade networks seem to break down, even though there is now increasing evidence that not all of them broke down, but broadly, the civilization does disintegrate, and therefore there have been a apparent disconnect between the two civilizations. Now, in the 1950s, especially with the influence of Mortimer Wheeler, great British archaeologist, as we know, there was increasing concern that this Aryan migration or invasion into India in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, therefore placed right between these two civilizations, would have caused what was called sometimes a dark age or a Vedic night, separating the two civilizations. And even though some material continuities were accepted, essential cultural discontinuity now came to the front. And therefore, you do find statements by, respected Indian historians. I quote here Rabindranath Thapa, but I could quote Shirindratnagar or many others to the fact that R.S. Sharma and so on, that there are no continuities. And here, Rabindranath Thapa even says no material continuities, which is quite in contradiction with what a lot of preceding archaeologists had already documented. So basically, there is a big mass of evidence which has accumulated in the last 20, 30 years, apart from the early archaeologists, to show that there are massive continuities in the material field, especially in ceramic technology, pottery, in water management techniques, in metallurgy, and the whole range of Harappan crafts about which you have already heard. A lot of continuities can be traced and have been traced. Also, in construction techniques, some specific Harappan technologies survive, and urban concepts even. If you read, for example, the book by Peter Eltzoff, From Harappa to Hastinapura, he brings out a lot of very, very convincing parallels between urban concepts in those two urbanizations of India. The first, the Harappan; the second, the Gangetic or Indo-Gangetic. So metrology is a work that I delved into, where I showed that a lot of units of length in particular were common to the two civilizations. Religious practices was done right from the very beginning. John Marshall, we will meet him again during this brief travel through iconography of Harappan and later civilizations. John Marshall immediately said that there is nothing much to distinguish the Harappan religion from still surviving popular Hinduism. This is almost word to word his quotation. So there is no doubt that actually there is a big mass of continuity. But now I want to focus today on certain more specific fields. And for example, objects of ritual practice. Before we come to the artistic iconography, properly speaking, let us move around that field, because these are all interconnected fields eventually. So there have been certain convincing elements. These are two types of conch shells which have emerged both at Harappa. So the first on the top right has its tip cleanly sawn off, which means it is used for trumpeting, right? You don't do this unless you're going to blow into it. So, a conch shell used for trumpeting is something that, of course, even surviving Hinduism today is quite familiar with. And then the one on the bottom left is a conch shell where the tip is intact, as you can see, but the mouth has been cleanly cut open. It's not very easy to cut shell. By the way, the Harappans were quite skilled at it, but it requires a special care and effort. And you can see the number of lines. Sorry, I was given a pointer, perhaps. You can see these lines here, which were very cleanly incised and filled with red pigment. So there is an intention. When you do that, means you have a cultural addition, as certain scholars call it. You are distinguishing the object and making it special. And well, we all have seen in certain pujas, for example, priests using such open conch shells as a kind of natural spoon to pour water or ghee or whatever you wish into the sacrificial pit, altar. So are these exactly these uses that the Harappans were assigning to these objects? Now becomes a theoretical question. You see, because we have an object which was used in a certain way, let us say in recent times, and we find a similar object 4,000 years ago, does it mean that the purpose is identically the same? Because we don't have any Harappan literature, of course, it's always a delicate question to answer, and we have to be cautious. But ultimately, I believe that it's only by accumulating such evidences, the whole mass of it becomes very convincing. But still we could have, a situation where maybe this conch shell on the top right was used by a guard, perhaps as a kind of a whistle, and maybe it's not actually a religious purpose. Ultimately, these questions will never be final. But again, we have to simply keep on accumulating the evidence and look for smaller clues and hints here and there. The bottom left is pretty convincing because of this value addition of, red pigment filled incised lines. So there is definitely a very high cultural value attached to it. Now there is this controversial field of, did the Harappans do fire sacrifices? Were there fire altars? A lot of scholars have proposed that they were. Dr. S.R. Rao was perhaps the first at Lothal here. He excavated this structure which is found in a street. It's a public structure. It's not a private structure. And it measures 2.6 by 2.7 meters. So it's quite large. You see, it's much larger than a small private altar or even a small cooking hearth that you might be using, So, and then what he found in it, and you can see there are some terracotta cakes in the middle, and then there's a big layer of ash. So there are no bones. It's not something that was used either to sacrifice or to cook animals, let us say. And there is this huge jar, which you can see in the Lothal Museum, which is about, if I remember well, 60 to 70 centimeters in height. So quite substantial. You have actually the archaeologist's rod standing next to it, which is 1 meter. And this jar suggests, this is what he suggested, and not far away he found a beautiful shell ladle, which had its edges a little bit charred by fire. And it was not far away, so he suggested that the ladle might have been used to pour something from this jar and offer it into a fire. Now, this is of course a conjecture. It can be disputed, it has been disputed, but I have not seen any convincing alternative being given. Because if you assume that this was something for collective cooking, for some feast or something, then usually the altar would not be preserved. And secondly, you would find some Harappans were not vegetarians. You would expect some bones, as you do find in a lot of other situations in Harappan civilization. So let's take it as a conjecture, but it is not absurd. At least there is some likelihood attached to it. The second, which I personally find convincing, is the one which was found by Dr. R.S. Bisht at Banawali. Unfortunately, at the very last leg of the excavation, so he himself told me that he didn't have really enough time to do proper documentation and publish it properly. It is published in Indian Archaeological Review, and he does write that he found again a thick layer of ash and nothing else. So whether it is an industrial activity remains to be examined, but for this we would need some chemical analysis of the whole place, whether you would enclose an industrial furnace within such a massive walls. As you can see, they are very thick, is debatable. And why should you have a apsidal shape for the whole building, which for many art historians will be reminiscent of temple structures, and again a repeated apsidal shape for the inner structure inside? This is suggestive, and Dr. Bish was not adverse to the idea that it could be a kind of a fire temple. But it is again conjectural. We have to admit that there is no clinching proof. It is simply suggestive. So I move on to now another not so controversial topic, but still something which raises a lot of question on Harappan religion, and it is possible linga worship. Now the whole question is that very few such objects have been found. This is a small terracotta reproduction, very convincing, you will admit, of a linga found at Kalibangan, and even the platform is pretty faithful to modern depictions. We have another one from Gregory Posel. It is from Harappa, and it is found very close to what would have been its location, built with bricks, so the whole platform fits with this linga which you find here detached. It's unfortunate that this object doesn't seem to have been well documented in the reports, at least as far as I know. And then the third is what Professor Prabhakar showed us this morning. It's a stone linga. This is a photo from the National Museum found at Dholavira, which is also quite convincing. And there are possibly a few more. But it is not found, far from it, in every Harappan site. And therefore, what John Marshall actually from the beginning suggested that the Harappan religion was not monolithic. It doesn't have to be the same, set of religious objects that you will find all over the civilization. It's too vast to be monolithic, first of all. And there are, in every other area of Harappan life, take pottery, take ornaments, you find evidence of regional variations. There are certain common features and there are certain, regional features. So it is possible, though here we have Kalibangan, Harappa and Dholavira, which is represents a fairly widespread distribution. But was it a cult for a certain part of the society alone, or for the whole of the society? These are questions that cannot be answered at the moment. There is a suggestion that not only the linga, but possibly the Trishula, if it was regarded as such by the Harappans, and that is the big theoretical question again, that the Trishula was there, because this is a broken seal, and in fact this trident, let us call it in a more neutral term as a trident, is also one of the signs of the Harappan script, by the way. So this means that the object had a certain importance. But was it meant to be a Trishula, and do we have a kind of archaic cult of Shiva, is again something that we have to leave in suspense. Now, we had some reference to the Mother Goddess this morning, and here you can see on the left a fairly standard terracotta figurine of the Harappan Mother Goddess, if it is really Mother Goddess. Now, why exactly did some archaeologists propose that this was a goddess? I think it was mainly due to the extravagant headdress. So you have a whole line of arch of flowers, huge ear pendants, and this fan-shaped headdress over it. So there is certainly a higher status attached to the figure, whether a goddess or not, but there is a higher status. And then those two cups on either side of the head, terracotta cups, and in a few of these figurines, actual traces of soot, burnt carbon, were found exactly as you would find after burning oil in an oil lamp. So therefore, the suggestion from archaeologists has been that these were used as oil lamps, as deeper, and if so, then it is fairly secure that this is an object of worship in that case, because you would not attach this to any. There are lots of other female Harappan figurines, women suckling a baby, women kneading some bread. They are depicted in all kinds of daily activities, but this is something which is obviously special. And scholars, this is not from me, but scholars propose that there is continuity here in the art depiction of the figure with the Mathura style in particular, with later styles, because you see here now the fan-shaped headdress has disappeared, but the arch of huge flowers remains, the ear pendants remains, the neck, the special necklace, something like it remains, and then the pendant over the chest also. So this is not my suggestion, but some scholars have proposed that we do have here an artistic continuity. And I would like to quote here the great art historian Stella Kramrisch, who wrote that a lot of popular terracotta art in India today, of course she was writing in the 60s perhaps, is very clearly in the lineage of Harappan art. So this is something reasonably convincing. Incidentally, and this is just for, this is another impressive and well-known figurine of the Harappan mother goddess. Here we have something interesting that was pointed out to me one day by someone in Gujarat, which is that in Gujarat at Deepavali, they usually make these special figurines with where there are also 2 oil lamps, but they are actually supported. They are not protruding from the massive headdress. They are actually supported by the hands, but they are in the same position. So I do not think that this is very common in South India. I don't remember having seen it, but in Gujarat it is. All right. You will have, so I would request a photograph in that case so that I can. No, it should be on either side of the head, specifically, which is the case here. That was the idea, you see. So anyway, this, of course, I have to live with a big question mark because we are jumping across 4,000 years. We would have to provide some links of transmission. Now we move on to the ornaments. And there are quite a few. This is a well-known anklet, which is from the foot bronze of a bronze figurine. It's unfortunate that the figurine itself is missing. And here we have therefore the origin of the Indian tradition of anklets worn by women most of the time. But there are also, across archaeological excavation reports, you will find also nose studs, ear studs, and basically a whole assemblage of ornaments which is still in common use in India today. This one comes from Nausharo, and which is an early Harappan site in Balochistan. And the archaeologists there, and I think it was again Professor Kenoyer, suggested that the presence of red pigment at the parting of the hair, so this was proposed by American archaeologists, not by Indian ones, was actually in line with the Indian tradition of applying sindoor at this location. Well, this is not very widespread. It's only a few figurines that have this. During the mature Harappan phase, I'm not aware of such statuettes have been found with the same red pigment. And once again, even if it is the case, we have to ask, was this specific for, married women, or did it mean something different? And these are questions which, again, are extremely difficult to answer. Now, we come to the famous dancing girl bronze figurine. And she actually provides us with several cases of continuity. The first, of course, is the wearing of bangles all over the red arm, and I'm going to return to this in a moment. So Harappans were extremely fond of bangles. They made them in all kinds of materials, from shell, gold, copper, bronze, to humble terracotta, maybe for people who could not afford the more costly materials. And they are depicted, they are found in large numbers in graves and so on and so forth. So this is one. Secondly, is this akimbo posture. You see the position of the right elbow, which was commented in kind of semi-fanciful manners by all kinds of archaeologists that, she was being defiant or this or that. The point is that after this, several potsherds were recovered at Bhirana, in particular in Haryana, where you have the same figure in a very highly stylized manner, not as elaborate as here, with the same right arm in akimbo posture. So if that is depicted several times, then there is a meaning to it. What exactly is the meaning? So some of our dancers said that this is also a posture of Bharatanatyam. Of course it is, but is it something that we can really connect to this posture? I mean, in terms of meaning, is something, again, we cannot easily answer. But this is interesting to note, at least. And then, of course, the technological part, which is the bronze casting method. It is the lost wax technique, which has been transmitted. This is the standard a quite well-known phenomenon transmitted to later historical India, and all the way to our current traditional bronze casters. If you go to Swami Malai, for example, they are still using the very same lost wax technique. And this is what I wanted to show you in terms of bangles. This is from the northern gate of Dholavira, about which we've heard just now. But see the lady, she's actually accidentally photographed just to give the scale. All right, the intention of the photographer, he just took a worker who was excavating there, said, sit down there, you will give us the scale. But it's very amusing that this worker gives us a good example of something you will come across frequently in Gujarat and Rajasthan, which is ladies wearing bangles all over the arm. And because this is actually very difficult, you need bangles of different sizes, which are, assembled together. It must be wearisome to put them back and put them off. So today they are, cheating a little bit, and they have these plastic sets of spiral bangles which imitate these individual bangles which were worn together. So, traditions are always flexible, and they can adapt themselves to modern times. But this is certainly a good example of continuity right from Harappan times, there's no doubt. Just a word of continuity in terms of games. So again, Dr. S.R. Rao at Lothal on the left proposed that this set of gamesmen is a neutral term. Chessmen, which he used in his excavation report, is a little less neutral, because though he tried to assemble them on a chessboard, and some of you might have seen that photo in the Lothal excavation report, but it's not absolutely certain that this is the classic game of chess, which even in historical period took time to evolve out of Chaturanga. So anyway, it is certainly initiating a long tradition of board games in India. This much we can safely say. And the example on the right is about dice from Harappa, which look surprisingly modern in their shape, but they have a different distribution of numbers. It's not, the opposite 1 and 6 and 2 and 5 that we follow today. Now I'm coming to symbols and iconography in the more usual sense, and we begin with this symbol that is scholars call the endless knot, and it is represented on quite a few objects. This is a copper tablet from Mohenjo-daro, but it is also still in use in historical India, and these two examples are in the center from a Gujarati inscription dated to the 9th century AD, and the one on the right, which Dr. Bisht kindly pointed out to me, is from Fatehpur Sikri. So at least the meaning in the inscription in the center is known. This is a symbol of royalty, and that is how it is used occasionally in Indian inscriptions of historical times. Whether this was again the meaning for the Mohenjo-daro tablet is something that we cannot easily decide. But it has a special status, and it is depicted on a number of Harappan ornaments and objects. So the second one again is in fact much better known, and this is the swastika. Harappans were very fond of the swastika. They represented it clockwise, anti-clockwise, single, double, different extensions. So there's a whole geometry of the swastika Harappan symbols, and this is clearly because here we have some evidence of usually we have a lot of missing links. Now we have some of the connecting links, and on the right you can see the swastika on painted greyware potsherds. And we will find it again in a moment in historical India. So painted greyware is a culture of the 2nd millennium BCE, which is not late Harappan, but there might have been contacts with the late Harappans. It is something that will evolve later into the second phase of urbanism. So the date is unknown, but at least it provides some connection. This is on the left, one of the several Harappan tablets depicting a tree. But this tree is special. Why is it special? For a very simple device, and this is a standard iconographic device in classical Indian art, that it is on a raised platform. When you put an object on a raised platform, you are simply communicating that you are raising the status of the object. And therefore, this is not just a tree as a tree. It's a tree as something else. And where Harappan's tree worshippers, or did they use them in some rituals, we can only speculate. But at least they revered the tree as something which could be elevated to a higher meaning. This is the whole symbol that must be accompanying the tree. And on the right, you see this very similar use of a tree as a symbol in punch-mark coins. You know that punch-mark coins is the first currency of early historical India. And we find something very similar, where the tree is elevated to a different status. So here continuity is very suggestive. In fact, now I would like to shift to more to the symbolism on the punch-mark coins. But before we come to the symbolism, there is a technological aspect here, which is that punch-mark coins, which were made of silver, as you know, if you see, their size are quite irregular. Unless the Harappan seals, which were very nicely square most of the time, the size are irregular. Why are they irregular? Very simply because what mattered was not the size of the coin, but the weight of the coin. And Didi Kosambi, well known to all of you, who was also a mathematician, one day had access to thousands of coins from the Taxila hoards, and he published 2 papers in the 1940s where he did a proper statistical study. He weighed all these coins, and he made a statistical study of the weight distribution of the coins of Taxila. And he found that they more or less followed the Harappan weights, which, as you know, have a very precise mathematical progression. First of all, geometric progression, and then multiples of 10. So he found that this, and I've given the exact quotation here, that this was patterned on the Mohenjo-daro series of weight, which he has access to at that time. In fact, why stop at Mohenjo-daro? If you look at the Indian markets, the shopkeepers in the pre-independence era, before the metric system was finally adopted by all, it followed certain traditional weights, the ratis, the karshas. Even the goldsmith continued for quite some time to use those traditional weights, and only in the last 30 years or so finally shifted to the metric system. And what John Michel, a British Indologist, found is that if you see at the top, we are the Harappan weights with the value in grams, and at the bottom you have the traditional Indian weights, and you see that the values, look at the 2 bottom lines, the values are almost identical. They hardly deviate from each other. You have 0.85 grams for the fundamental Harappan weight, 0.84, I'm rounding the figures, for the Indian traditional weight, and so on. So the pattern is very, very striking. This cannot be a coincidence. So here we have a very convincing case of continuity. Now, coming to the symbols, I am borrowing here completely the work of Savita Sharma, who published a whole volume on this, where she has put in parallel painstakingly the thousands of symbols found on punch-mark coins with Harappan symbols. And you can, if you see the table on the left, one criticism could be that you see, when you are going to start designing geometric symbols, it's bound to happen that you will be landing on very similar symbols. And that is a valid argument or counter argument. But when you see more complex symbols and you have them in the center and in the right tables, then you are a little beyond coincidence. For example, if you look at the one, I'll use a pointer. And I'll be coming back to this one, where on the left you have a Harappan bull with Harappan signs on it, and something which has been sometimes called the ritual stand in front of the bull. And then on the punchmark coins, you have also a bull with something above and some indistinguishable, because it's extremely tiny, object in front of it. Similarly, if you look at this crocodile, Harappan crocodile having a fish in its jaw, and on the right also on the punchmark coins. So there are certain, and then some more complex geometric symbols which are a little beyond simple conceptual coincidences. So overall, I personally think that the case of continuity and transmission here is reasonably convincing. We move now to the Pashupati seal, which is actually, this designation comes from John Marshall. It was he who said that this is Pashupati, but it's a misconception, which the art historian Doris Srinivas strongly challenged in a couple of papers in the 1970s, because first of all, Pashu is a domesticated animal. These are powerful wild animals. So John Marshall thought that Shiva as Pashupati dominates wild animals, but that's not actually the case. However, the iconography, I'm not really bothered here as to who this figure is supposed to represent. I'm more interested in the iconographic transmissions that we can derive from it. First of all, the three faces, that is unmistakable. And, close-up photographs have established that, yes, and repeated designs from others. Let me show you immediately. I'm sorry. Let me show you, oops, this other seal, bottom right, where again you have two prominent noses on either side and there's one in the center. So this three-headedness is something that will, of course, be later on applied to other figures such as Brahma. Of course, Brahma has four, but then the fourth will be at the back. And Shiva himself also has three faces. And therefore, there is an iconographic continuity, at least, whoever this figure is supposed to represent. Secondly, the classic yogic posture, which, in fact, I think it was Krishnamacharya who identified it with the Mula Bandhasana of Hatha Yoga. It is not lotus posture, as some scholars wrongly stated. It's a posture which I don't advise you try it without proper training, because it's difficult. You bring your heels together and then you stick them under your hips in a way that your knees will be perfectly parallel to, the whole alignment of the legs will be just one line. So it's not at all easy, but this is the posture which is repeatedly and very clearly described on those seals. So we have a possible transmission of asanas, and I'll come back to this later. Then the raised platform and the two antelopes below. The one on the right is broken. You can see just the antlers, but this is very clear. Now, when I visited Ajanta, I took this photo. It's not very, very good. I'm sorry. I should ask, in fact, Professor Prabhakar to give me a better one, because he worked there as superintending archaeologist of ASI long back. But I noticed that Buddha is sometimes represented on a raised platform with two deer below, beneath it. So again, do we have a continuity, or is it a coincidence? I only plead that let's accumulate the evidence and then decide over the totality of the mass of evidence. I think this is the safer method. But speaking of and I'll request nobody to take photographs of the next slide, because I'll explain why. So please, no photos. This was shared with us a few days ago by Professor Massimo Vidale, and he didn't want it to be recorded. So please, no photo. Mr. Subramaniam? No photos, please. Thank you. Because this is a seal which was illegally traded in 2009 of unknown exact origin, but certified to be a genuine Harappan seal, not a fake. There's a lot of fake, industry and trade of fake Harappan objects, but this is not the case. And it was sold in England for 60,000 British pounds. right? So there's a very thriving trade in both genuine but clandestinely excavated objects and also fake objects. So this shows, it's another unpublished, therefore, image of a so-called Pashupati, whatever this figure is. Again, you can see very clearly the three figures. This is the seal, so it is carved. You see, it's a hollow carved seal. I wish we could have a seal impression of it, which would allow us to discuss it better. But according to Professor Massimo Virale of Padua University, who was with us at IIT Gandhinagar a few days ago, it shows two women with quotation marks because it's not absolutely certain, on either side, presenting something to the horned deity, which now has a fluent beard. So these would be the two women, but whether these are actually women with this long plate of hair, which is a ceremonial plate, in fact, I will come back to this later, and they seem to be offering something to him. And you can see that here there is a fluent beard, which is not depicted in the other seals. So, and then the arms of the three personages are entirely covered with bangles. Bangles again, I forgot to point out, yes, that these are supposed to be bangles. So there is a very, very clear kinship between these two figures. They are one and the same. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. They are one and the same, but ultimately, who exactly is this figure and what is the meaning of those signs around it? This is not fully understood. The bull, the buffalo-shaped horns is common also to all these representations. Let me move on, and these are different figures from Harappan tablets. On the left, you have a terracotta tablet where a figure with again three kind of leaves emerging from the top. Let me come back to the previous one a second. Here also, you have three kind of leaves emerging from the top of the head, and here similarly it is present. You can see it here. But what is more interesting is that there is an arch. Now, you, especially in South India, might be tempted that this is an arch of fire, like a Shiva here on the right. But no, these are not flames. These are people leaves. On the left, the terracotta tablet, these are people leaves. But the shape is surprisingly similar. And do we have again some iconographic transmission between the two? Because the motifs seem to be quite similar. I will leave it to you to decide. But on the right here, you have also, and I'll be returning to this seal in a moment, you have also people leaves very clearly. So here the arch is inverted. It is open at the top. On the left, the arch is open at the bottom. Is there a special meaning to this inversion? Oh. Exactly.
And Sama. And
so these are the three Vedas.
I'll give you the paper
Please,
later.
please. So what's extremely interesting is that the people is Ashwatha, in Tamil it is Arsamaram maybe, is represented very widely in Harappan art. So they attach a special value to this tree. And this, of course, continues in popular Hinduism, but also in the Veda. Yes. And in Mahabharata, Ashwatha stands for the entire universe. There's an image in Mahabharata where the universe is compared to an Ashwatha tree. And of course, we know in the Bhagavad Gita also this Ashwatha with the roots above and so on. So there is here definite clear continuity. Now, I come back to this seal, which I think Professor Prabhakar has already introduced it. sometimes called great adoration seal, worship seal, whatever it may be. Obviously, there is a scene of some worship going on. And this figure emerging here is clearly not an ordinary figure. Once again, there is a buffalo headdress. Once again, there are bangles on the arms. So is this the same figure as the one represented seated in this yogic posture? Possibly, but ultimately we cannot fully answer. You have this composite animal. The face is human, and this is the makor horns, but then the body is more the body of a bull. And this figure was being, the old interpretation was that this animal was being led to sacrifice. But Dr. Nagaswamy, in fact, produced a rebuttal of this argument. I do not recall precisely his argument. He said, no, this is an accompanying animal, but it is not being led to sacrifice. And he had a whole iconographic explanation for his argument, in fact. We should go back to it. And then you have this, which some scholars have proposed is a human head on a stool, but I feel that the detail is becoming too, this seal is only 5 centimeters. So to get now this level of precision is really challenging. It could be also, someone would like to read a kamandalu with some ritual objects next to it. It's also possible. So anyway, let us be cautious here. But we have this row of 7 figures which have been compared to sometimes 7 worshippers, 7 rishis, 7 mothers. This is, of course, speculative. But I would like to point out that in the Rig Veda, this posture of being with bended knees, I'm giving all the references here, being with bended knees and uplifted hands is something which comes frequently. I found it in many mantras of the Rig Veda. So it is interesting that the posture is precisely described. Now we move on to these beautiful seals with the unicorn, first of all. And here we have to admit that in later Indian iconography, it is not something which is usually found. There is no such thing as a depiction of a unicorn in the same kind of style. But however, I found several references in the Rig Veda to a bull with sharpened horns. Indra, for example, is very, very often praised, and I can give the references. In fact, they are in my book on the Saraswati River. I've given all the precise references from the Rig Veda, and sometimes it is used in a singular. The Sanskrit sometimes is singular with a sharpened horn. All right, so maybe I'm pushing a parallel, but we cannot also rule it out. And in Mahabharata, Krishna says, in days of old, I was known by the name Ekashringa. I think this was first pointed out by Dr. Rajaram or Dr. Frole. I do not exactly, I'll have to go back to the source. This is not from me. Whereas the sharpened horn is something that I found in Rig Veda. Now, let's continue with the bull. Bull, of course, there will be massive use of the bull in later Indian iconography. This is the hump bull, but there are also many depictions of the humpless bull. And not only in seals, but occasionally in figurines. I forget, Professor Pravaka will be able to tell us where this comes from. I forget, but this is a beautiful stone figurine. Is it from Haryana? Yeah, I thought it was from Haryana. And now, when we move to the historical depiction, it's of course extremely widespread. And we have here on the Ashokan capitals, we have here the use of a hump bull also, which therefore is in continuity. But also Harappans were very fond of mythical creatures where they would mix several animals on, so antelope, bull, etc. in a single one. So composite animal is also something that will be used in depictions in temples where we have lions on an elephant body and so on and so forth. So this is an iconographic device that will become fairly common. And again, am I forcing a parallel when I said that Agni is depicted as three-headed in the Rig Veda? I'm not saying that Rig Veda is what you find in Harappan civilization, but there could have been transmissions one way or the other between these concepts and these artistic descriptions. Whatever it may be, please see how the Harappan bull, I did not put here, sometimes stands in front of a ritual stand. We saw one earlier. And this is something that becomes very interestingly in use in the punchmark coins. We have these horses, sometimes lions, different animals, and the bull also standing in front of an object. So this object here is actually the triple hill, as it is called in Mauryan art. But it can be something different and sometimes indistinguishable. So there is the iconographic device of a powerful animal, emblematic animal, standing in front of a symbolic object is probably from the Harappan tradition. And then you have some symbols, usually the swastika, but other symbols also, above the animal, which is exactly the layout of the Harappan seals also. Animal in front of a symbolic emblem with signs above. It's exactly the same general layout. And here, in fact, is another way from unknown provenance, where you have not one, and you see this is another, it's a kind of a stand, where you have not one, but several signs above, including the swastika again. We move on to the famous depiction of the tablets from Harappa, where you have a ritual sacrifice of a bull. What allows the archaeologists to propose that it is a ritual sacrifice? Well, again, the presence of the same deity with the buffalo-shaped horn dress and the very clear, same identical Mula Bandhasana posture of the feet. So if it was simply killing a buffalo to eat the meat, you would not have a kind of an iconography. This figure, which is probably some kind of a deity, is witnessing this scene. Now, scholars have proposed that this is an antecedent of the Mahishasura Mardini theme, where Durga, as we know, slays the Asura. But it need not be specifically Durga. Even the Toda tribals here in the Nilgiris used to sacrifice ritually a buffalo, even though they would not eat the meat. They are vegetarians, in fact. They would ritually sacrifice the buffalo because the buffalo's spirit would then guide, it is at the death of someone, would then guide the soul of the departed person to the afterworld. This is in the Toda culture, that is the meaning of slaying of the buffalo. Now, what would it have been for Harappans? Again, we cannot speculate too much, but there might have been some transmission from those days on. Sorry? It's a bit hard to distinguish. The details are not, we would need and you see this is terracotta. It's not an incised, hard steatite seal where you have more precision and there might have been some damage also. So it's very difficult to say whether it's a single or three-headed, I don't know. But the buffalo headdress is clear and the yogic posture. Here, however, there are no bangles also because they would have been too frail to have them in terracotta. They would have broken off probably. Some evidence of yogic posture has been proposed by S.R. Rao perhaps initially and other scholars, and we saw already this so-called Pashupati in a yogic posture. Does it mean that Harappan had some proto-yoga practice already? This has been suggested in two papers by two foreign scholars, but we have to ultimately leave it hanging. And coming towards the end of my presentation, the so-called priest king So all these designations, priest king, dancing girl, are somewhat arbitrary. They may or may not be what we assign to them. So Professor Prabhakar has given the background to this. I will simply say that this fillet on the head, I mean, the position of the bead does coincide with a position where a lot of symbols are applied in later Hinduism. But not only that, there is another fillet on the top of the right arm, where also a bead would have been probably stuck. And this is a place where, you know, a lot of traditional Hindus, as we know, still wear amulets or rudrakshas or some ornament of some kind. And also the wearing of the dress over the left shoulder is something that becomes part of the Indian traditional dress. So in conclusion, I'll just quickly skim through these quotations. This one I already mentioned at the start. William Fairservice, American archaeologist, who, though he strongly defended the migration theory, Aryan migration theory, he still stated is that, and it's a very strong statement to make, that the answer to the question as to why the Harappan civilization fell is that it didn't fall. It simply stood at the beginning of the mainstream of Indian culture and faded into that current, having brought to it acts of faith, class morality, aspects of technology, perhaps a cosmology which heralded the eventual supreme achievement that was medieval India. So that's quite a strong statement of continuity. A similar statement of Jim Schaffer rejecting the concept of a dark age between the two urban phases of Indian civilization. A similar statement by Jonathan Marquenoyer and also Professor Bibilan, who gives us all the areas where continuity is now well documented. And D.P. Agrawal also, who gives us a nice summary from the style of bangles that women wear in Rajasthan today, the vermilion they apply, practice of yoga. And please note that Dr. D.P. Agrawal is a very skeptic scholar normally. Binary system of weights and measures, basic architecture of the houses, all of this can be traced back to the Indus civilization. So therefore, that civilization provides us with the substratum for the latter-day Indian civilization. And I think altogether they provide us with a suitable conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Danino. I am happy to see some roots of Indian iconography in Indus Valley civilization. And you are bold enough to say the Mahishasura could be, because other scholar whom you quoted, they says a human, neither male nor female. So you first time, yeah, this one. You said this type of thing we got two. One from Harappa, one from Mohenjo-daro.
Yes.
And one is partly broken, this is complete. And backside of this, there is another interesting thing. On the elephant, a Bharat is standing and two tiger or lion are there. And on the top, one wheel is there.
True.
So that is also there. And you can also illustrate that backside portion also.
Well, I simply wanted to discuss this possible transmission, but please note that I have put a question mark after Mahishasura Mardini, because even, you know, transmission is a very complex phenomenon. It can happen in all kinds of directions, in direct ways, indirect ways. I could propose that maybe the Mahishasura Mardini theme was borrowed from some tribal communities in India. This has been actually proposed by some scholars. So it may not be in direct continuity from the Harappan tradition. It could be that the Harappan tradition was shared with some tribal communities, and from that, then the Mahishasura Mardini theme emerged. So therefore the question mark. I'm cautious. I'm not implying that every time we should read direct transmissions, because very often the mechanisms of transmissions are far more complex.
Can I just add a point to that? Is it working? In my book of demons, I think you have
Yes.
seen it.
Oh, yes.
I showed how several tribes, the Gonds, the Todas, all had this buffalo worship tradition, which was the traditional god of all the indigenous tribes of India, the worship of the buffalo. And as they were pushed into the forest by food producers, that is when the whole symbolism of the goddess killing the buffalo came, because the goddess is a goddess of fertility, of food production. The buffalo represents the tribal community.
Quite
That's my
possible.
opinion.
Quite possible. But please know that the deity also has a buffalo
The deity is
headdress.
also here.
So it's interesting that he has a buffalo headdress and then the buffalo is being killed.
Hello.
The,
It's difficult to
yeah.
decipher.
Hello, sir. Very wonderful lecture. You're talking about Shivalingam. Shivalingam. Is it overread? Huh? I think it's overread because in so many cultures there was phallic worship in the older civilizations. And if it's connected with Shivalinga, there should be a lot of people, and Shaiva religion should exist. Number two, the dancing girl, she's given a pose like this. Anybody can give a pose like that. And generally this body language says somebody is tired and waiting for somebody. Yeah? And if it's a woman, a man holding like this, you don't call her a dancing girl. Thank you, sir.
So I don't call her a dancing girl. This is the standard designation which I've used with quotation marks. I don't, because I don't know who this young lady is supposed to be. Secondly, if this is just a random posture, why do you depict it multiple times? Because Birana postures have come, at least two of them. The late L.S. Rao published those postures with the same, and there's only this. There's a stylized figure with this akimbo arm. There is an intention. That's all I say. There is an intention. You don't just keep a random depiction like this repeated. That is one thing. About these. Whether it should be a linga or phallic worship, let me just say one thing, because this is actually a very big, it goes very deep, this question. If you read the Shiva Purana, right, what is the origin of the linga? Because linga in Sanskrit originally means a sign and a symbol. It doesn't mean a phallus. And if you read Shiva Purana, it explains where it comes from. It comes from this Lingodbhava story, where there's an infinite column of fire, which is actually Shiva. And you know the story, Brahma lying that he has reached the peak and Vishnu digging and honestly admitting that he could not reach the bottom because it's an infinite column of fire. And Shiva Purana specifically states that for the purpose of worship, this has been shrunk to the size of a linga. Because you can't have an infinite column of stone. So you have to limit it somewhere. And it says it will be the symbol of Shiva. And there is no phallic worship at that stage. Now, the association with the phallic worship, to me, but that requires a much deeper study, and we have better scholars here, is actually a later addition over the initial concept of this infinite column, which actually comes from Rig Veda, because in Rig Veda, Agni has no beginning nor end. So this will go very deep. We cannot just sum it up and say it's either phallic or it is not linga, whatever. We'll have to,
I think the beginning of the phallic worship comes only in the 2nd century BC from Gudimallam. That's the first time that it is a phallic linga. Till then, there is no phallic linga.
Just one observation for the seal displayed there.
We can't hear you, sir.
One observation in regard to the seal displayed there. Behind the buffalo is the crocodile, which also was worshipped. So
Yes.
it adds to the possibility of a scene of worship.
It is a gharial, and yes, the gharial, which is the Gangetic crocodile, is often depicted in Harappan art. What is it supposed to mean? Does it symbolize a river? Does it symbolize something completely different?
Mr. N.
It's
Ganesan
extremely
has,
difficult. In classical Indian art, of course, it becomes the Vahana of Ganga, in fact.
But it's worshipped separately
Yes.
as an animal in Goa. It's a tradition
Mr.
in
N.
Goa.
Ganesan has dealt with this.
But here
this
we are
topic
completely speculating.
in
We just
detail.
don't know.
This crocodile worship has been dealt in detail in our latest book on Harappa, published by the Hindu group.
Sorry, we can't.
This crocodile worship has been dealt in detail in the book we have brought out on Harappan civilization.
I see. I'll have a look at it. Thank you.